I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime, and this is Currents.
Did the Pope really say that? Benedict's comments on condoms stir up a lot of controversy. We get some expert analysis.
He is not talking about the use of condoms as birth control.
Plus, seeing red in Rome. Benedict creates 24 new cardinals for the church. And on the waterfront, the real-life inspiration for a Hollywood classic.
Well, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. If you read a news website or a newspaper this weekend, you probably saw some eyebrow-raising headlines like Pope Benedict approves condom use. But is that really what happened?
Well, those eyebrow-raising headlines were based on newly released excerpts from a new book by German author and journalist Peter Seewald. It's called The Light of the World: The Pope, the Church, and the Signs of the Times. It's scheduled to hit store shelves tomorrow, but excerpts like the pontiff's comment on condoms are already causing controversy.
Sure are. In an interview with Seewald, Benedict said in some cases involving disease prevention, condom use could be a good first step toward taking moral responsibility for one's actions. Now, some people see that as a seismic change in the church's stance on condom use, but the Vatican says nothing's changed.
That's right. And to put all of this into context, I sat down earlier today with Father Joe Giabino, professor of systemic theology at St. John's University. Father Giabino, thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure as always.
Well, of course, a lot of the headlines over the weekend read something to the effect of Pope approves condom use in some circumstances. Is that actually what happened? What did the Pope actually say?
Well, what was actually said is a reflection about an experience that he had while journeying in Africa, in which there was quite a bit of discussion about the Church's position on the use of condoms in terms of HIV and AIDS. So in that sense, the Pope is talking about a very specific situation. He is not talking about the use of condoms as birth control. In no way does this influence at all the Church's very consistent teaching on a ban of artificial means of birth control. This was actually in reference to an imaginary situation of a male prostitute in Africa who is himself a victim of HIV/AIDS. And one of the other really important things to place this in a context is that really the Pope is talking about the dignity of the human person. Is it in a moral world acceptable for a young man to be in that position of having to sell his body? And the second piece is this in keeping with the Church's teaching on intelligence, rationality, reason, and free will?
Right. Well, and you know, there's been, of course, a lot of back and forth since the initial excerpt from this book has come out, and the Vatican has sort of said that almost exactly what you had said. Father Federico Lombardi, the spokesman for the Vatican, has now come out and said that condoms are not the solution to the problem of HIV/AIDS, talking about it in that context of disease prevention and saying that this changes nothing about contraception, but saying that it's not the solution to the problem, it's maybe one part of what can be or lead to a solution to a problem of HIV and AIDS. Regarding that, and regarding contraception as well, and the overall concept of condom use, what is the Church's stance?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's very helpful to place it in the context of the dignity of the human person. So we are created in the image and likeness of God, and in baptism and in confirmation we are anointed and made temples of the Holy Spirit. So within the sacramental context and in the scriptural context, we then become very important in our dignity. Tied into that then is it an intelligent thing? Is it reasonable? And then do I freely choose this? So in terms of HIV/AIDS, we'd have to put it in the context of a grave social sin. We'd have to talk about the Church's consistent aid given to people living with HIV and AIDS, and His Holiness does address that issue, that the Church as an institution and social body has done more for people with HIV/AIDS, both spiritually, physically, taking care of their medical needs, and psychologically than most other institutions in the world. So this is a very positive statement on the role of the Church in the world, and it's also saying that we as a society have to be mindful of our human dignity and the proper use of our bodies. All very consistent with the Church's teaching.
And you were talking about the charity that is provided from the church and from religious institutions and groups to people living with HIV/AIDS and trying to prevent the spread of the disease. Caritas International was one of the groups that came out and said, that this is great that the Pope has said this, and that they were really saying that it shows the importance and compassion and sensitivity in dealing with the complexities of HIV/AIDS. So the general public, I guess, has sort of had this perception that the Church is sort of insensitive to people who are living with HIV/AIDS in that particular context. What would you say to that, and does this change that perception, perhaps?
Well, I think it is a great misperception on the part of the media that the Catholic Church has done nothing to support people with HIV/AIDS. Indeed, and in fact, so many of our charitable organizations provide medical care, emotional care, and spiritual care to persons suffering during this pandemic. It also, though, asks us to consider the steps of moral development. And His Holiness was very clear that the use of a condom might be the first step in a greater awareness and moral clarity. He is not talking about it as a medical solution. In fact, the Church has never held that position. We're looking at it rather in the context, how does someone grow in a moral sense of responsibility in the middle of a pandemic? Right. It's very different than birth control, and it's very different than just a wholesale permission to do whatever one wants.
Sure. So just before we wrap up here, Father, does the news that we got this weekend, does it really change anything at all?
Really nothing at all. The Church is consistent in saying that any form of artificial birth control is a grave moral evil. So that would be the use of condoms by a couple to prevent a pregnancy. It does ask us to consider in charity the role of those persons suffering with HIV/AIDS, and it does ask us to consider how we grow as moral individuals in faith and reason. And in that sense, could the use of a condom be the first step in moral development for an individual during a pandemic?
All right. Well, Father, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate your time to talk about this. I'm sure there's a lot more discussion to come, but we appreciate you coming here to kind of put it in context for us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I posted much more about all of this over on our blog. Just go to currentsny.net and click on Riding the Wave.
All right, well, there's much more current straight ahead. Mega churches are growing even in a tough economy. We have that story and the rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. Coming up in a bit, we'll go on the waterfront to meet a priest who inspired a Hollywood classic.
But first, let's have a look at the day's headlines. A group of Arab Christians in Jerusalem is calling for the canonization of those killed in the massacre at an Iraqi cathedral 3 weeks ago. In a petition, the group says of the victims, the example of their lives and their sacrifice is an example to all Christians living in the Middle East. And Pope Benedict prayed for Christians being persecuted around the world, particularly in Iraq, during his Angelus prayer on Sunday. Meanwhile, 2 more Christians were killed in Iraq earlier today. The men, who were brothers, were gunned down in Mosul in the store they owned. From Pakistan, the country's president has pardoned a Christian woman sentenced to die. Asia Bibi, who was a mother of 5, was found guilty of blasphemy. Bibi says that she had been falsely accused by some of her Muslim co-workers. She says the accusation was revenge for a petty disagreement. She was imprisoned for more than a year and a half and was not allowed to present her case in court. Turning now to this country, the town of Maryville, Tennessee, that town is reinstating a Bible reading at its Christmas celebration just 1 year after doing away with it over legal concerns. A lawyer says the original decision to cancel the reading was based on a misunderstanding of the Constitution. He says the reading is protected free speech. Well, the tough economy is not slowing down the growth of megachurches. A new study shows those churches are seeing a rise in both attendance and in giving. The Large Church Economic Outlook report shows that more than 81% of megachurches saw increased attendance between 2009 and 2010. Furthermore, 67% of the churches increased their budgets in that time period. The report also shows that the bigger the church, the more likely it is to grow.
Well, a Protestant pastor in Neptune, New Jersey, who told leaders at his church to quit Facebook or resign, has now himself offered to resign. Pastor Cedric Miller now admits that he and his wife had a three-way affair with a male church worker more than 10 years ago. Well, just a week ago, Miller warned his church that Facebook can lead to infidelity. Well, turning now to England, an Anglican bishop is apologizing for what he called the deeply offensive remarks he made on the internet about Prince William. In comments made on Facebook and Twitter, Bishop Peter Broadbent said he would give Prince William's upcoming marriage to Kate Middleton 7 years. Broadbent said that remark, along with others he made, were a major error of judgment on his part. He added that he apologized unreservedly. And finally, a town in western Poland unveiled what it claims is the largest statue of Jesus in the world. The statue, which is, according to one estimate, 167 feet tall, was consecrated on Sunday. Residents of the Polish town hope their statue will become a tourist attraction and pilgrimage destination. The famous Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil is 125 feet tall. That's more than 40 feet shorter.
That is a big statue.
Indeed.
Well, stay tuned. There's much more current straight ahead.
Just ahead, bird watching in the Basilica. We'll bring you news about the new cardinals.
Welcome back. Well, it doesn't happen often, but it did happen this past weekend. The Pope installed 24 new cardinals, including 2 from the United States, Washington Archbishop Donald Wuerl and former St. Louis Archbishop Raymond Burke.
Well, among other things, cardinals will elect the next pope, and one of them, in fact, could be the next pope. We get highlights of Saturday's ceremony now from Rome Reports.
Benedict XVI has presided over a solemn ceremony in St. Peter's Basilica for the creation of 24 new cardinals from around the world. Among them are 15 Europeans, 4 Africans, 2 from the U.S., 2 Latin Americans, and 1 Asian. 4 of the new cardinals are over the age of 80 and therefore not eligible to participate in an eventual conclave. After the names of the new cardinals were read out, a member of their group, Cardinal Angelo Amato, prefect of the Congregation for Causes of Saints, thanked Pope Benedict for his confidence in them and said it was an honor to work with the Pope in the service of others. We confirm our feelings of affection, devotion, trust, and loyalty. We realize that as members of the College of Cardinals, we're called to be at your side in carrying out the apostolic ministry entrusted to you. Benedict XVI said that this new responsibility requires a greater willingness to follow in the way of Jesus. And this path, the Pope said, is not about an exercise in power as it is of being of service to others.
Non è la logica del dominio, del potere secondo I criteri umani, ma la logica del chinarsi per lavare I piedi, la logica del servizio. La logica della croce, che è la base di ogni esercizio dell'autorità.
The Pope said that this new responsibility in the Church is not the result of a personal design or their own ambition, but a response to God's call.
Nella Chiesa nessuno è padrone, ma tutti sono chiamati, tutti sono inviati, tutti sono raggiunti e guidati dalla grazia divina.
Unicum, Dominum nostrum, qui conceptus est de Spiritu Sancto, natus ex nihilo.
After giving his homily, the cardinals swore allegiance and obedience to the Pope and his successors. Benedict XVI gave each of the 24 new cardinals their red hat, or biretta, and a certificate with the name of the titular Church of Rome assigned to each of them. The first new cardinal was Archbishop Angelo Amato, and the final one was Monsignor Domenico Bartolucci, former director of the Sistine Chapel Choir. While giving each his red hat, The Pope explained that the color red means a willingness to shed their own blood for the faith, peace, freedom, and the spread of the Church. Afterwards, each exchanged the sign of peace. The College of Cardinals is now made up of 203 members, of whom 121 are electors who are able to vote in a conclave.
And our own Rocco Palma, I was checking out his blog, Whispers in the Loggia, just the other day, and he said that there were 200 cardinals now in the College of Cardinals for the first time ever, 200 plus, 203 I think they said the number was there, but more than 200 for the first time ever.
Wow, wow. And this is the first time I've heard what the red signifies, which is, you know, the shedding of their blood, that they would do that for people. So, yeah, learn something every day.
Absolutely. Well, stay with us. We'll be right back. When we return, we go on the waterfront to explore a slice of New York history. Well, finally tonight, we take you out of the studio to the waterfront and a fresh look at an acclaimed film. You know, a lot of us are familiar with the award-winning movie On the Waterfront, starring Marlon Brando and Karl Malden, but many may not know the true story behind it.
It is actually based on the life and work of a Jesuit priest, Father John Pete Corridon. He's also known as the Waterfront Priest. And last week, new attention was focused on his life and his work at Sacred Heart Church in Bayside.
What are you going to do about it? What do you mean, about telling her? Yes, about telling her. The commission, your subpoena. I know you got a subpoena.
Father Pete Corridon, who was the waterfront priest, a Jesuit, and the character who represents him in the great movie On the Waterfront, is known as Father Pete Barry, and that's no coincidence. His main focus, his crusade really, on behalf of dock workers and their families between 1948 and 1953, was that dock workers needed to reclaim their God-given dignity, the dignity of their work, by being empowered to stand up, to testify, to bear witness as to their actual experience. The movie was inspired by Father Corridon, and it was told from his perspective almost in its entirety. He had such an influence on the screenwriter that Bud Schulberger was determined that this would be his monument, his legacy, and it really recapitulates 5 or 6 years of work he did on the actual, what I call the waterfront of history, and we create what we call the waterfront of memory, you know, this magnificent cultural work of art.
I think the relevance of tonight's topic is because the issues of labor is still a major issue for us, and the dignity of work, not only because this country is undergoing so much unemployment and underemployment, and so many people hardly get a living wage, but also because of the abuse of so many immigrant people now in the whole labor market.
Catholic social teaching has been called by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops the greatest kept secret of the Catholic faith. And so we have a very vital parish here at Sacred Heart in Bayside. So we thought, why not form a group to promote those sorts of values? 2 years ago, we had the honor of having Father Daniel Berrigan come and speak here. And he spoke about how this Father Pete Corridon had influenced him. They lived together at Xavier for a number of years, and they knew each other, and they knew the work that they were doing.
What Father Corridon did was he instigated these public hearings under the auspices of the New York State Crime Commission in 1952 and early 1953, in which hundreds and hundreds of dock workers were subpoenaed to appear before this panel. The Jesuit hierarchy was extraordinarily progressive. When they were threatened with being cut off all the charitable lists that the waterfront entrepreneurs kept, the provincial said, well, what are we here for? You know, we're here to do justice. And it's a very, very inspiring story in that way in history, certainly the Jesuits. And of course what it did too is it created a kind of an internal struggle within the church, which is very important as you move now towards the Vatican II era of the 1960s. It kind of helped to pave the way for this really fundamental change in the way many Catholics understood issues of social justice. Father Corridon's goal was to oust the International Longshoremen's Association as the bargaining agent for the men, and he wanted to see that corrupt union replaced by a democratic union. Father Corridon now had been so openly identified with his fiery partisanship on behalf of the new union. He was extremely controversial, and really this represented the end of his work. Think of the irony of this. Just at the moment that this magnificent artistic triumph is being achieved, it opens in July of 1954. It's exactly at that time that the Jesuits essentially conclude that his work is over.
There certainly are all kinds of struggles going on today, a lot of injustice, and people that are working in that field can get very, very discouraged at times. But we need to hear these stories of others who went on and who persisted in spite of difficulties. And
Father Corridon is really among the absolutely most remarkable figures in the Catholic social justice tradition. He deserves much greater recognition, and I think what we're trying to do in this work is to kind of bring him to the forefront, because there's so much to build on too in the work that he did.
Obviously, a real connection that they were making today with some of those signs in there in terms of immigrant labor. But, you know, Catholic social teaching, social justice, the dignity of the human person, being able to really, you know, empower people to act in ways that are right, but also reward them in ways that are right.
Yeah, and it's surprising, you know, how many parallels there are between that, you know, the story there, the true story of what actually happened then, and what's, you know, kind of happening now with the immigration issue and a lot of other things. And so, you know, you learn, what's the old saying that those who don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. I guess it's kind of, you know, kind of all coming full circle here, but you know, you can see that that really had a profound effect in a lot of ways.
Yeah, great movie. Well, that is it for tonight. Coming up tomorrow, the busiest travel day of the year is approaching, and a lot of people are not happy about what is waiting for them at the airport. We will look at some moral and ethical questions surrounding those notorious TSA pat-downs and searches.
And you'll find more of that theme of the dignity of the human person a lot on tomorrow's show as well. So in the meantime, remember though, we're always online. Currentsny.net is the website. You can find us also over on Twitter and on Facebook as well. Until next time, I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a great night.